Good morning. Today I am sitting with Father
Dan Carr,
and we are sitting in the
rectory or office, really, of Visitation Parish, partner parish, Visitation Parish with St. Pius X.
and Visitation is on what street?
It's 740 West Walnut.
Good. And St. Pius down the road is
Summit and Silver. I don't know the number.
It's okay.
I don't know the number.
That's all right. You know where to go. That's all. That's all.
Yeah, Visitation's on the west side of town. St. Pius is on the east side of town.
And of course, we're in Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania. Yeah. How long have you been serving here in Mount Pleasant?
About a year and a half.
Oh, very good. Mm-hmm. And what do you think was your biggest surprise in coming here, or were you fully prepared for Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania?
I wasn't prepared because it was kind of a quick turnaround. Normally we reassign and move people around June, which is kind of a relaxed time. I was moved in January because the previous pastor here, Father Tom, had passed away from COVID.
Yes.
And so I came in and was asked to be the priest on the ground celebrating the masses and the priest living in Mount Pleasant. So it kind of happened fast, and here I am.
Speaking of masses, what are the times of your services?
So we just changed the schedule in July. So we have a 4 o'clock on Saturday at Visitation with confessions prior, and then we have a 6 o'clock at St. Pius, and then on Sunday we have an 8:30 and a 10:30. The 8:30 is here at Visitation, and the 10:30 is at St. Pius.
Well, that sounds like that keeps you very busy.
Yes. It does.
And we were talking before, people are still hesitant to come back to church after being shut down for the pandemic. Why do you think that is?
I think for some, they're hesitant because they're still kind of afraid. But I don't think that's the majority of people. My experience is when COVID, when people started coming back, even during COVID, it was the older people who came back, ironically, the ones who were most vulnerable and most susceptible. And I think that's because they had been around long enough to see the value of church, whereas a lot of younger people hadn't invested enough of themselves into attending and into seeing the fruits of that. When we talk about Christianity, so often I think we think of it as like, well, it's a series of rules to follow. But that's not what it is. It's primarily a relationship with Jesus Christ. And like any relationship, if you're early in your relationship with someone and something happens, you can walk away and it doesn't impact you as much. But if you're later in that relationship, it's much less to leave behind. You will do more to sustain that relationship. And so I think for the older people who came back, they realized, no, I need this. I've lived long enough to realize I can't do this without God. I can't do this without the church. Whereas for a younger person, it's like, okay, yeah, you go to church. There are some days that you kind of feel like, why am I doing this? I'd be better off getting more sleep. And I think that was people's experience during COVID. Like, okay, I'm just going to stay home. I'm going to get more sleep. But they hadn't really seen the value of what church does over time.
Right.
That's
a very good perspective.
The family meal is a kind of a similar thing in my mind. I just saw statistics not too long ago. They said that when they survey adult Gen Zers, which is like the youngest generation now, only 38% regularly ate around a table growing up with their family. And that used to be a staple of American existence. Like you always sat at the dinner table and ate as a family. That's gone.
Right.
And
That's
I think,
unfortunate.
It is. And I think it's reduced and weakened the bonds of family because you just don't spend that time together. And I remember being a kid, like, there were days I didn't want to sit there. I wanted to watch TV or read a book or play on the computer, eat my food there and be apart from. But I had to sit there with the people I was annoyed with the people I didn't want to spend time with, the people that bothered me the most.
Yes.
But now we're close. And it's because every single day we sat together at least one meal a day and spent that time with one another. And that's how relationship happens. And if we're missing relationship, if we're lonely, if we're anxious, if we don't have someone we feel like we can turn to, that's because we haven't fostered enough relationship. We haven't invested ourselves. And so my plea to people in many cases, and one of the reasons the church is doing a Eucharistic revival, the Catholic Church around the United States is doing a Eucharistic revival, to really look and say, if we've stepped away from the Eucharist, do we realize that we've stepped away from the family table? That we're not spending the time that's going to strengthen the bonds between us and the Lord? and us in one another.
Right.
So that I think is why.
I think that's an awesome answer. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say, I just don't think people, they think, oh, I don't miss it, but then they start noticing things changing, and they don't know why. Why am I so depressed?
Well,
why am I so anxious?
I hope they come to their senses and realize this is what is missing.
That's my hope as well.
Are you hopeful that there'll be an upswing in Christianity in the near future?
I always hope that.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. You look at 2,000 years of history, and the church has experienced ups and downs, increases and declines. The world is going to happen.
Right.
The world is going to happen, and we do our part, because if we truly love each and every person, we want every single person to come to know and love Jesus Christ. But they have to make that decision on their own. We can invite them. We can try and have them come, but they have to make that choice. I'm not going to walk into your house every day and say, it's time to get up and go to Mass. You need to make that decision. Somebody needs to make that choice. And when you make that choice, my experience, and this is true not just of going to church, but it's so many different things. You don't want to do it. But at the end, when you go home, you say, I'm glad I did it.
Yes, right.
Those are the things you have to sacrifice to be willing to do.
Right.
Like, okay, this is really important. I know I don't want to do it right now, but I'm going to be glad I did it, and in the long run, I'm really going to be glad I did it.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Was there somebody who influenced you to go into the ministry, to choose this as your vocation? I know God above would be your answer, but someone here on earth.
Yeah,
who would you give credit for this?
I mean, the most credit probably goes to my mother, not just because of my upbringing, but because she kind of prompted the words that made me really specifically think about this. I was 27 years old. I'd been living in the world, so to speak, for about 5 years, had a business, decided to close it, and then I wasn't sure what to do with my life.
Yeah.
And priesthood was not on the list, but she said something that put it on the list, and then slowly, as everything else fell away, I realized, if I don't give this a try, I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life, and I would have. This is clearly what God has called me to do, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Do you think your business experience helped you in the ministry?
It does.
It does.
There was a technical, so I was a programmer, web programming, databases, that kind of stuff. That always comes in handy. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
I've talked to many ministers. It does seem like whatever was in your past before you got in the ministry, God was using that to prepare you for the ministry.
I think so. Within a very short period of time, I was put temporarily in charge of a community, and the leadership that I learned of running a business and kind of the mechanics of how to relate to people really came in handy. The tech stuff doesn't hurt either.
No, not today.
Especially when COVID happened, we were doing live streaming and all that sort of stuff. That really came in handy.
Right. What do you think, if somebody from your parish followed you for a week, what do you think would surprise them about what you do to prepare for your services, what your day-to-day activities? What do you think would surprise them the most? Or better yet, what surprised you when you got into the priesthood?
I think what would surprise people are the many facets or the aspects of ministry, because there are so many things that we do that just, I don't want to say they don't go unnoticed, but they go unheralded. People don't talk about them. We try to visit people who are homebound and bring them communion. We try to put together youth programs that are going to catechize them and teach them about the faith. We try to bring in volunteers who are not only willing, but are capable in certain areas and are going to be nourished by their activities that they do. There are so many aspects to what we do. And then there's the whole component of just sitting down with somebody and talking with them one-on-one when they're going through something tough. Those moments are probably the most impactful moments for me as a priest, because you really make a tangible difference in that person's life. I might stand up and preach an amazing homily, and there are 100 people, or over the course of 4 masses, we have 400 people who listen to me, but I don't think that's as impactful as sitting down with one person and having an in-depth conversation about what they're dealing with in their life. And so I think people would be surprised about how I spend my time and the way that the Lord is working in very unseen ways.
Okay. That's a good question, a good answer.
It was a good question, too.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, they don't give this job to chimps. Anyway, one last, we have a few minutes left of the interview. I'm just going to give it over to you. Can you give the people watching an encouraging word, something to maybe encourage them to come back to church, or just to encourage them to get through the hardships of their day?
I think we live in a time when, and I'm a techie, so I'm very much involved in using technology, but I find that technology wants me to be efficient and it wants convenience thrust upon me. And I love those two things, because if I can be as efficient as possible with my time, and then I can enjoy a very convenient life, I get a lot of time to myself, a lot of time for pastimes, a lot of time to do what I want to do. But I'm finding that that's not really an authentic life. It's so artificial because it's built on something that I didn't help produce. Like, I could probably survive on DoorDash, and just like have food brought to my house, but then I would never learn how to cook. It's an investment having to learn how to cook. Yes. And so actually I cheat a little bit. I get HelloFresh. And so I have the meals still delivered, but I actually have to prepare it in the kitchen. And that's so much more authentic. It's so much more real.
Right. And
I believe that it's way too easy to live a sort of inauthentic life where we miss how things happen. We get all the results, but we don't get any of the aspects of like how this comes to be. And most human existence has been much more authentic and real, and it's tougher, and you have to go through days that you don't want to go through. But that's much more real, and it's much more human. And so my encouragement to people is, if you feel like you're living that life of convenience or of efficiency, take a step back and ask yourself, what am I missing? Like, what's the bigger picture here? I think that bigger picture involves God, involves a relationship with Jesus Christ. And as part of, again, I'll mention the Eucharistic revival, trying to see the Eucharist as the source and summit of the Christian life. Like, for us as Catholics, like, that's fundamental. And it's really rooted in that very authentic, that very real presence of God among us that comes about because we bring forward bread and wine, things that we've made out of the things that God has given us to grow from the earth, and then we share it with God, and then He gives it back to us transformed. And I just think that that's a very powerful image for the way we should live our lives. We receive what God has given us, we make it better, and then we give it back to Him. And that's far more authentic than the kind of DoorDash mentality that I think it's very easy to fall into, because it's just so convenient, and it's so easy to be lazy. But I think we really have to be intentional and think about what are the consequences of this on who I become as a human being. So maybe some deep thoughts, but
yeah, very deep. You've enlightened me and empowered me. I appreciate meeting you. Thank you for sitting down with me.
Absolutely.
And until next time, God bless.